Well, hello there. This is Shane from Shane's Books and Review, and I hope you are having a great day today. It is Friday. We made it, didn't we? Quite personally, I was starting to wonder how many more little details was going to be needed to be accomplished this week before I could get to this day. Oh no, Vector, what have you done?
Where did you go? There you are. How did you get back there?
Well, now that we have saved the robot from imminent doom of laying on its side, we're going to be talking about Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Are You Going to Behave? Which was released on October the 19th of 1953, I think it was. And as mentioned on Monday, it was a completely different climate in 1953 than it is now, but some of the things that were prevalent then are still prevalent now. A lot of that has to do with what's the president doing? Is technology going to be our death? Some of the book is still very prevalent today and for today's society, which really surprised me. Because whenever I first started reading it, I thought this is a little bit antiquated, really. But on the same token of that, I was also quite surprised with a lot of the things that were in there, because instead of focusing in on particular types of technology or naming technology, it was kind of left open, which is a trademark of a good author. There are several things that were technological advances that could be considered highly advanced, like fireproof housing, or this thing called the Hound, which has an ability to track everything down, or one person down, having a TV on every wall so that it's like you're completely immersed in it. That sounds completely familiar in a lot of ways. But with that being said, even with all those great little insights on what could happen, there was this underlying thing as well. We're going to talk about it in the perspective of whenever I read it via the tactile first, and then we will talk about the audible recording second, because a lot of the same details will apply to the audible recording, with the exception of the narrator, which was Tim Robbins. So as I read the yes. Oh, now you've got my attention. You don't know what to do. Trying real hard, aren't you? You'll be all right. The thing about the book that was really remarkable was not so much the technological type aspects of it and him skipping over mass details so that it would remain relevant and our own imaginations would fill in the details of today to make it much more relevant. There was also the political side of the book. The thing that can be said, though, is that I'm sure that the same type of feelings about uncertainty and war and people just not really wanting to be involved in it, but supporting their country and doing what they had to do, is where a lot of the semantics and a lot of the text that were on those pages came from. Because whenever I looked it up, that was whenever McCarthy was in as a president. Whenever he was president, there was a lot of questioning about book burnings and would this be something that would be allowed. I know that after reading this, it seems like this is like a dialogue opener for, is this something that we would really want? Will mass media and TV and all these things that are coming out right now and becoming more and more prevalent in our lives be our downfall? Will we be expected to just accept this one source, and is this source a safe source? So these are kind of the ideas and things that I was picking up from the book as I was reading it, that all came from that sort of a fear. And it made me think of another author, Anne Ryan. Some of the ideas and expressions that she had in The Fountainhead and also Atlas Shrugged. Correlation there between Fahrenheit 451 and that is, it seems like from another part of the world, Anne Ryan was living in a society where these things were prevalent and you could be executed for saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong stuff, but she prevailed anyway as an author and came out with some fantastic books. To me, those books really said very, very loudly, learn from our mistakes, move ahead, and do your best to contribute to the people around you. I might not have got the same things out of that as other people might have got, but that's the way that I took those books, and they were highly enjoyable. And if you haven't read them, do check them out, because they are really, really well-wrote books. A little bit lengthy, but it's worth it to get to the end. Back to Fahrenheit. With that being said about the political climate and the uncertainty of war and all that kind of a thing, let's move past that point. Let's get more to the actual subject matter of the book. It starts out, we have Guy Montag, and is in a nondescript town/city in America somewhere. There is one clue, though. It wasn't Chicago. He is a fireman, and firemen are not the same in the book as they are now. He's in his little routine. He's very happy with his life and the way that things are going, or so he thinks. He ends up meeting this nice little girl, young woman, that's still in school. And she is everything that would be considered his antithesis. So she is a free thinker. She doesn't see things in the same way that he does, where he presents himself as a very linear type of an individual from point A to point B to point C and done. She is the complete opposite of that. There are times where she will make him little gifts and leave them on his doorstep or on his door, or she'll ask him about this or ask him about that. Every time that she has an interaction with him, it is a calculated interaction on her part to get a reaction from him, but not out of a trolling spirit, rather more of a exploratory spirit of why is it that you really do feel this way or expect this is the way that life is? What if? And there was actually one point where she's like, look, I'm sorry that I infuriate you, but if you're not mad at me, let's have another conversation about this stuff. So what happens is a seed ends up planted within Guy Montag. And this seed is a very devastating seed for anybody that would be living in this fictionalized world. It is certainly dystopia, considered a time where things had moved on. And it's in those little questions and that seed that was planted where Guy Montag realizes that maybe he's not indeed happy. The materialistic things, they're not really doing it for him. There might be indeed something that's missing within his life. He doesn't have children, hence his fatherly attentions towards Clarice, a seemingly daughterly type relationship that's developing from her to him. I didn't really take it as a weird, creepy old dude talking to a I'm in high school girl. It kind of fell flat on me, really, whenever I was reading it, that whole section. What I could see happening in that situation as I was reading about this in the first part of the book, which is divided into 3 parts, is the wrong person seeing this young girl and this old guy walking together. I was really hoping that wouldn't be the way that the book was going to go, and I was so very delightfully wrong in all of those assumptions on my part. But that's today's society. As a guy, I'm a big guy. I'm over 6 foot tall. But if I was in that situation, I would distance myself just as fast as possible so that in today's society, I wouldn't have an opening where that kind of a dilemma would occur. Now, with all that on the tape, that was a good thing that it was just as simple as that. And that shows a big difference between today's society and society in 1953. Sure, there's a lot of similarities, but things were so much more simple and honest. Not everybody was nefarious, and you didn't have to protect yourself and have your guard up all the time, which in some ways would have been a better way to live for sure. So we find out that indeed Montag is a fireman, and a fireman doesn't put out fires anymore. In fact, they actually start them. Their job is to, when somebody has these dangerous books, these outlaw things, that they go and burn them. And a lot of the time, it happens in a very safe way where the person is either being questioned by the police or they've been checked into a mental facility from their family. The house is usually vacant whenever they burn it, which is a very important detail. So he goes on and describes that in a little bit of detail to Clarice, and she kind of skips over that. She doesn't even acknowledge that was a good way of doing things. And it is clear that she's trying to get him to think for himself in a lot of the ways. Now, there comes a point where she disappears and he doesn't know what's happened to her. But there's a evening where he goes to burn some books with the fire crew. Woohoo! Whenever he gets there, there's the woman still in the house, and there's thousands upon thousands of books there. This is where things really start to change for Montag altogether, because if we pay attention when we're first reading it, he'll mention something about the ventilator. And then after this, then we revisit that and we find out that he's been taking more than just a book here or there. He's been stealing books every chance that he gets. The owner of the house that owns all these books, she doesn't want to leave. After they've soaked everything with kerosene and they're getting ready to light the fire to burn all the books out of the house, she ends up pulling a kitchen match out and she burns herself. And this really gets Montag thinking, why would somebody want to give their life like that? Why would they do this? He has the realization that all these books, they have been wrote by someone. Some mind had to think them up, had to put all the text in a row. There had to be something to this more than just what he's always been told, which is the books were nothing but gobbledygook, that they weren't really anything there for substance, and they're not based off of real people or real things at all. They were dangerous because they would make people not happy. Now, whenever he gets home, he kind of breaks down and he has a go with his wife about it. He's got one of these books from that house underneath his pillow. Hey, you got to call in for me, because if I call in and Beatty hears me, then things just won't go the way they need to go. I need to stay home. So he could read one of these books. Now, lo and behold, Beatty does show up, which is his fire inspector chief from the Salamanders 451. Whenever he gets there, he starts a monologue. And wow, was this a monologue. I mean, if he was a bad guy and he was in a anime or a movie, he would have had the spotlights on him with a dark background, and he would have been chomping on a cigar hanging out of his mouth, pontificating and pointing fingers and everything, because this was indeed a monologue. Beatty takes Montag and his wife through this whole scenario. Hey, look, books weren't always bad, but here's what happened. So he gives a brief history of how books went from being something good to something not good. So books originally had some good content in them, but some of them were offensive. In order to keep people happy, then they removed these books. But if you're going to remove these books that offend these people, then you might as well remove these books as well, because these people are going to be offended. And we ended up having authors that were on board with this, and they would make these books that were so wishy-washy and not offensive that they didn't even matter to pass forward through the rest of his monologue. It ends up getting to the point where you're going to have Shakespeare known in just 2 lines. And yeah, that would be a useless thing, would it not? Because the beauty of Shakespeare is not in just 2 lines. Anyway, during that whole time period, his wife is trying to fluff up his pillow and get to the realization that there's a book behind her husband, and here's the guy that could burn their house and everything. Boy, that started to get fun. Beatty leaves, and Montag is left with his wife. He tries to convince her that we need to go through these books. We need to read them. There's got to be something in here. This can't really be the way that it is, because there's something missing here in everybody's life, and she doesn't see it because she's a completely materialistic individual. And in fact, earlier in the book, she had been begging off on trying to get him to install the 4th wall TV so that she would be completely surrounded. Now, he had already made sacrifices to get the 3rd wall TV, and I'm assuming the 2nd wall and 1st wall, so they were kind of pinched on their budget. She just didn't care. She just wanted that last one so she could be completely wrapped around. We all know a person or two that's like that, for sure. But it also made for a not healthy relationship with Montag, between Montag and Mrs. Montag, for sure. Now, the scene that I'm talking about is where he ends up in the kitchen floor with all the books, and he's trying to read them, and he's failing miserably, and he's also getting very, very anxious and wrapped up. He remembers that there was this old guy by the name of Faber, I think it was, that was a professor. At one point, he had a run-in with him before, and he thought that maybe he had a book that he had just put away because of some of the words that he used. He wants Faber to teach him these things, teach him how to read. Faber is very reluctant, and I kind of took it as a, no, I ain't falling for that. You are a fireman, you burn books, and you destroy people's lives if they have books, and guilty by not being guilty, sorry but not sorry, no, I don't want anything to do with you. They end up conversing back and forth, and finally, Montag just rips out a book, and he's like, hey, what is this thing, and why does this not make sense, and can you teach me how to read, how to understand this? And so they kind of strike a little bit of a deal, and then the seed of uprising gets planted into Montag, and boy, does he run with that. He's wanting to get a printing press going. He's wanting to put books into other people's houses so that they could be burned, problems dealt with, etc. Almost like a revenge scheme in a way, but just enough to disrupt the system that was currently there so that maybe they could get some of these basic human truths to be known again, on how to be human, how to interact with each other, how to move forward as a society and as a species. The war stuff that's going on in the background that's not really mentioned except for at the beginning, that bombs may or may not be dropped, and a couple times during the book it's mentioned about jets flying overhead, and where did all these jets come from? With all that happening, and with him working with Faber gives him this little earplug so that he can keep in contact. It's a 2-way radio type of a system. Montag really starts to lose his crap whenever he learns how to ingest these materials. Faber does a pretty good job of trying to curate Montag into a responsible human being, but Montag, after years of oppression, just absolutely snaps. Whenever he's at a party that his wife is having, where all of her friends are over, he ends up reading some poetry. She tries to play it off like, once a year we get to read a book, and it reminds us as a family of how silly and unproductive and how bad these things are for us. And then they throw the book into the incinerator, and Faber the whole time is dying on the other side. He's like, would you just not do this? Don't go down this road. Okay, well, now that you've done it, all right, let's see if we can clean this up. Act like you did it on purpose. Own it, burn it, be done with it. Well, one of his wife's friends gets so very upset about this because she indeed is the monster. She was talking about how she could do this to, or how she could do this, or her kids are this or this. And the way that Montag put it was, listen to these monsters talking about monsters. He really puts it to his wife's friend, and this gets her very upset. She calls in on him. Regardless of his wife's best laid plans of trying to calm everybody down, the whole dinner party is dispatched. Montag realizes that he will probably need to hide these books or distribute them, and he tried to strike a plan with his wife about that. He knew that his hiding hole in the ventilator was not a good enough hiding hole, so he started trying to hide them behind bushes and trees in his backyard, which, I mean, really, let's think about that for a second. How sweet and innocent an individual he had to be to think that something like that would work. You want to give him a free pass, right? Next time that he goes to work, there's another monologue, diatribe from Beatty, and in this one he starts misquoting, perverting some things, and trying to twist Montag around. Eventually makes it out to like, we're all on the same team, we're the happy people, and we make sure that people stay happy, and let's be brothers. After this little diatribe, there's of course an alarm, and in this alarm they go out, and Montag gets to the place that they're going to and realizes that it's his house that they're there to burn. After a little bit of back and forth, Montag goes in and he starts really burning stuff, cabinets, everything, because he wants a fresh start. He wants to just reboot as a human. He's a different person now. That's hinted about in the book as well, back and forth about with any experiences. There's the before you, the I'm getting the concept you, and then the I have learned a lesson you. This was certainly a lesson that was learned because shortly after the house was burned, the Hound was sicked upon Montag. And the Hound is a very deadly, very efficient machine that will capture and kill somebody that has gone rogue, essentially. The first place that Montag runs off to is, of course, his buddy Faber's house, and after watching some things on the television with his buddy, they hatch a plan. Montag takes off. This was where I really felt the book got weak. There was already a couple places where something was very easy, that it wasn't like it really would have happened if it was not fiction. Things just don't happen that easily, is my point. This thing is 100% efficient, and I fooled it with a little bit of alcohol and jumping into some water. That wasn't the part I had a problem with. The part I had a problem with was whenever he got into the woods, he gets almost abducted, but runs into some people that are fellow book lovers like himself. These people had been watching on their little portable TV, and they knew that he would be in the area, and they just happened to be there. I get it too, because it was kind of needed for that third-person perspective that Montag would have needed at that point to be able to really see the rest of the situation and how things were happening. Because if it hadn't been for that little setup, he wouldn't have seen on the TV the fake Montag get executed so they could say that they had their man. Montag gets a second life. Now, if we fast forward a little bit more, bombs finally get dropped. The group that he fell in with at the end, although they were kind of roaming a bit, they were people that were books. And essentially what that meant was that they had took the time to learn the book or chapter of a book and memorize it. And so everybody held the knowledge. And it was their hopes that one day they would be able to reprint this knowledge and distribute it again, which was a great thing. It was a good idea on their part. And the last couple of sequences in the book had to do with reflection upon humanity as a whole. What we needed to do with war. Why would we need war? And one day perhaps we can be big enough to get away from all that altogether and just turn our backs on it, do a whole lot of introspection, grow as a species, and get away from all these ignorant, hate-filled ideas. That's what I really think that the book, its base level, that's pretty much what it is get away from the hateful, ignorant things in your life, learn how to grow, and see what you can do to make yourself and the people around you, their lives, a lot better. So, do I recommend this book? I certainly do. It's a very good read. It's excellent. It's good thought-provoking material. It really is. So with that being said, now we're going to talk about the Audible side. Tim Robbins narrated the book and did an incredible job with it. I knew the name, of course, and I thought to myself, I wonder if that is the Tim Robbins. And it is. Oh, are you awake again? Well, anyway, Tim does an incredible job of narrating this book from the beginning to the end. And his voice cadence, and the production value that went into it were all incredible and all good. The different ways that he would portray the different characters was really well done and really thought out. And there was a minimalistic amount of characters in this book in comparison to some other books that we've talked about in the past. But the performance was true on Tim's part. I really felt that he transformed parts of this book into something more. There was 3 sections of the book that I can demonstrate that really I was like, meh, whatever. And that was with the girl. In some of the conversations, I understood the setup, I understood the character development and what was happening there. The second one is the train scene. What, you gonna act like you weren't doing something? The train scene where he was going to see Faber, whenever I read it, I was like, yeah, it's gotta suck to be you. And then the last one, Beatty was giving his monologues. Whenever I read them, it was well done, it was well wrote, but whenever I heard the way that Tim portrayed them, a value add. Because then I started to see that character in a different light. He wasn't just some pontificating guy on a horse that had spotlights shining down on him. No, indeed, he was a rear end of a most magnificent sort. And I also liked the way that he chose the different stylings on his voice for the characters as well, because that was also a bit of spice that was added in there. Mr. Tim Robbins, we'll never meet, but I wanted to say thank you so very much for your efforts in this book. You've done something incredible. You caused me almost to have a panic attack, and I'm not one for that sort of a thing. Whenever he was reading about the train scene, where there was this commercial, this ad that just kept playing over and over, it wasn't done in the way that you would think of like in a movie, right? You would think that there would be like a ding and then the things, but with the way that Tim changed his voice for the character monologue and dialogue for the actual commercial itself, and the dialogue going back and forth in between Faber and Montag, it was something that set me on absolute edge. And I got to the point where I was so aggravated that I literally had to take the earplug out of my ear, turn off the book, and just ignore that had happened altogether. And whenever I went back to it and I knew that the part wasn't finished yet, it got me just as aggravated as it came to that conclusion as it had whenever it first started. So well done. Absolutely well done. The other two parts that I was talking about with the young lady Clarice and Montag having conversations back and forth, it was the way in which he presented those that made those more interesting to me, made it more natural and less suspicious in my mind. It made it more true to that father and daughter surrogate type of a relationship in the way that he read those. Like I mentioned with Beatty, he was such a resilient rear end that really shone through in Tim's voice acting as he was doing that. So again, Tim, thank you so much for that. It was well done. It was value add to the book for sure. If I had my preference of if I were to hold the book and read it or listen to it, I would pick Tim's recording of this over the tactile book because of the way that he transformed that whole story. Now, here's where I'm going to ask you. That's right, all of you. Have you read the book and also listened to the book? And if you did, do you have the same sorts of feelings about it as I do, on that you enjoyed it more because there was more of an emotional tie from the narrator, being Tim Robbins in this instance, to the material that was being read? I mean, it was very plain and very obvious to me that Tim has read this book a long time ago and highly enjoyed it. And so he put that little special bit of love that he had for this book into his recording. Or do you just absolutely hate audiobooks altogether and don't want anything to do with those, and you just want to have your paper? I can respect that. I really can. Sometimes I feel that way myself. I hope you enjoyed our really long review. Today's book was Fahrenheit 451, wrote by Ray Bradbury. It was an excellent read. It is worth your time, efforts, and money for sure. Like, share, subscribe. This is Shane with Shane's Books and Review, and my troublemaker Vector, which apparently has decided, now that the video is over, to go park himself on his charger. Hope all you guys and gals have a wonderful weekend. I'll do my best to do the same, and I will see you on Monday.